Hello, dear listeners. Perhaps you too have once thought, if God really exists, why doesn't he appear directly from heaven to show himself? Why doesn't he prove himself scientifically with clarity? A few years ago, a university student asked me this question. Sir, I really want to believe, but asking me to just believe in the 21st century seems irresponsible, doesn't it? If God exists, why doesn't he prove it so that everyone can see? Before this question, I was momentarily speechless. Because this goes beyond a simple theological question. It reveals the most fundamental conflict of our time. The tension between science and faith, proof and belief, reason and revelation. Actually, such questions didn't arise suddenly. Since the Enlightenment, as Western civilization adopted rationalism, religious truth claims have increasingly come under suspicion. Through Descartes' methodological doubt, Hume's empiricism, and Kant's critical philosophy, traditional proofs of God were dismantled one by one. Particularly, Darwin's theory of evolution in the 19th century and the emergence of quantum mechanics in the 20th century fundamentally changed our understanding of the universe. It seemed that complex life forms in the precise universe could be explained without divine intervention. Laplace's statement to Napoleon, "Your Majesty, I have no need of that hypothesis," God, symbolically shows this zeitgeist. Interestingly, however, the situation has become complex again as we entered the 21st century. The development of fine-tuning cosmology, quantum consciousness theories, and complexity science pose new challenges to materialistic worldviews. Meanwhile, postmodern trends question scientific objectivity itself, claiming the relativity of all knowledge. In this confusing temporal context, the question, why doesn't God prove himself scientifically, takes on even more urgent and complex meaning. The topic we'll explore together today is by no means light, but through this journey, we will discover why God chose a different method rather than scientific proof, and what deep meaning this holds for us. This exploration is not merely to satisfy intellectual curiosity. It is an existential matter directly connected to each of our lives. Understanding God's mode of existence means understanding our own mode of existence. Chapter 1. The Challenge of Atheists and Our Perplexity. Richard Dawkins said in his book, The God Delusion, "If God exists, he must have scientifically measurable effects on the world. If such effects are not observed, we must conclude that God does not exist." This logic seems very rational at first glance. Christopher Hitchens also demanded scientific evidence from those claiming God's existence, saying, "Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence." Their arguments are based on Karl Popper's principle of falsifiability. According to Popper, to be a scientific theory, it must be falsifiable. That is, it must be possible to show it's wrong through some observation or experiment. They argue that claims about God's existence don't meet this criterion. Sam Harris goes further in The End of Faith, arguing that religious faith itself is an obstacle hindering human progress. He asserted that believing medieval superstitions in the 21st century is an abandonment of intellectual honesty. Daniel Dennett attempted to explain religion as a natural phenomenon in Breaking the Spell. According to him, religious belief is merely a byproduct of evolutionary adaptation or the result of cultural meme propagation, unrelated to any actual supernatural reality. But here, let's pause and consider whether such demands are legitimate. When we carefully analyze the claims of new atheists, we can see that they accept several unverified philosophical premises. First, scientism, the belief that scientific method is the only way to reach truth. But can this claim itself be scientifically proven? Impossible. This is a philosophical assumption. Second, materialistic reductionism, the belief that everything can be reduced to matter and energy. But can phenomena like consciousness, meaning, and values really be explained only through material processes? This remains an unsolved philosophical problem. Third, remnants of logical positivism. The idea that unverifiable propositions are meaningless. Logical positivism was already discarded in philosophical circles by the mid-20th century. Quine's holism, Kuhn's paradigm theory, and Lakatos's research program theory clearly showed its limitations. Nobel Prize winner Werner Heisenberg left these words: "What we observe is not nature itself, but nature exposed to our method of questioning." This gives us important insight. Science is certainly a powerful tool, but it's not an omnipotent tool that can handle all reality. Science deals with phenomena that are measurable, repeatable, and verifiable. But what if God is a being who transcends such categories? Actually, the limitations of science have long been discussed in philosophy of science. Gödel's incompleteness theorem showed that even mathematics cannot prove its own completeness. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle revealed fundamental limitations in physics. Kuhn's The Structure of Scientific Revolutions showed that science develops not through gradual progress, but through paradigm shifts. This suggests that scientific truth is also relative, not absolute. Paul Feyerabend argued in Against Method that there is no fixed methodology in science. His famous saying, "Anything goes," emphasized the diversity and flexibility of scientific methods. The Bible describes God thus: God is spirit, and his worshippers must worship in the spirit and in truth. John 4:24. The image of the invisible God. Colossians 1:15. The eternal King, immortal, invisible, the only God. 1 Timothy 1:17. What we should note here is that God is essentially not a material being. The God of the Bible is a spiritual being who transcends space and time. Then wouldn't the attempt to measure God, who is an immaterial being, with science that deals with material phenomena, be a category error from the start? This is like trying to understand poetry through chemical analysis or capturing music with mathematical formulas. Each reality has its appropriate method of recognition. Thomas Aquinas described God as being itself in the Summa Theologica. This means that God doesn't exist like other beings, but is the ground of existence itself. Making such a being the object of empirical observation is logically impossible. Here we need to ask a provocative question. Is scientific methodology the only path to truth? Philosopher Alvin Plantinga points out in Where the Conflict Really Lies. Scientific naturalism is based on philosophical premises that cannot be scientifically proven themselves. Indeed. Can the proposition, "only what can be scientifically proven is true," be scientifically proven? Impossible. This is a philosophical assumption, not a scientific conclusion. Actually, science itself depends on several unverifiable assumptions: the consistency of nature, the applicability of mathematics, the validity of inductive reasoning, trust in others' cognitive abilities, etc. These assumptions cannot be scientifically proven, but must be accepted for science to work. Interestingly, modern physics poses new challenges to materialistic worldviews. The Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics emphasizes the role of the observer. Heisenberg said, "What we observe is not nature, but nature exposed to our questions." This blurs the boundary between objective reality and subjective observation. Wheeler's participatory universe concept further suggests that observers create reality. The EPR paradox and Bell's theorem showed that local realism doesn't hold. The fine-tuning problem also raises interesting questions. If the physical constants of the universe had been slightly different, stars or life forms couldn't have existed. the probability of such coincidence is astronomically low. Of course, there are attempts to explain this through multiverse theory, but this too is just an unverifiable hypothesis. By Popper's standards, it can't be called a scientific theory. Even Stephen Hawking admitted in A Brief History of Time, if the universe has a beginning, we can ask what existed before, who caused it to begin. One of the greatest challenges modern science faces is the problem of consciousness. David Chalmers' Hard Problem of Consciousness deals with the gap between brain's physical processes and subjective experience. Why do we experience rather than simply process information? How can we explain the redness of seeing red through neural activity? How can we reduce the beauty felt when listening to music to electrical signals in the brain? Thomas Nagel argued in What Is It Like to Be a Bat? That consciousness's subjective character cannot be captured by objective science. No matter how perfectly we understand bat neuroscience, we cannot know what it feels like for a bat to perceive the world through echolocation. These problems suggest that materialism may not be an adequate explanatory system. If consciousness is not simply a byproduct of matter, we may need to fundamentally reconsider our understanding of reality. Chapter 2: Fundamental Reasons Why Scientific Proof is Impossible. God is not a created being. Science is a methodology that only works within the created world. To understand this, let me give an analogy. If someone reading Shakespeare's Hamlet claimed, "I cannot find Shakespeare in this play, therefore Shakespeare doesn't exist," what would that be like? The author is not within the work, but the author's intention and wisdom permeate the entire work. Similarly, the creator cannot be found within creation. Such category errors are called category mistakes in philosophy. This concept, presented by Gilbert Ryle in The Concept of Mind, refers to the error of trying to handle things belonging to different logical categories within the same category. For example, if someone touring a university campus asked, "I've seen the library, lecture halls, and research facilities, but where is the university?" This would be a category error. The university is not a physical entity like buildings, but an institutional reality that encompasses them. Similarly, treating God as one being within the universe is a category error. God is not one among beings, but the ground of being itself. Paul Tillich defined God as being itself, or ultimate concern, in systematic theology. From this perspective, the question, does God exist, is itself wrong. God is not an object that exists or doesn't exist, but the condition of possibility for all existence. And the 17th century scientist Galileo said, "Mathematics is the language in which the universe is written." But can mathematics and measurement capture all reality? Philosopher Michael Polanyi said, "In personal knowledge, we know more than we can tell. For example, we can immediately recognize a friend's face, but cannot completely quantify that recognition process." Demanding scientific proof makes humans the judging subject and God the judged object. But from a biblical perspective, this is a complete reversal of the subject-object relationship. In Job 38, God asks Job, "Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand." This passage points to the impropriety of the attempt by created beings to test the Creator God. Isaiah 55, 8-9 is in the same context. "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." What's important here is the ontological difference between humans and God. It's arrogant to assume that finite beings can completely understand or judge infinite being. Kant clearly established the limits of human reason in the Critique of pure reason. We can only know phenomena, not things in themselves. How much more could we completely grasp God, the ground of all existence, through human reason? Kierkegaard analyzed the existential situation of individuals before God in Fear and Trembling. He saw that in relationship with God, humans are always in the position of the judged. Therefore, human attempts to judge God are fundamentally wrong. Now let's think. If God were scientifically proven, faith would no longer be necessary. But Hebrews 11:6 says, "Without faith, it is impossible to please God." Why does God consider faith so important? Psychologist Erich Fromm said in The Art of Loving, "True love is trusting the other even in uncertainty." If everything were scientifically proven, it would become calculation, not trust. Kierkegaard also defined faith in concluding unscientific postscript as clinging to truth with infinite passion amid objective uncertainty. Rudolf Bultmann expressed faith as decision against proof in New Testament and mythology. Faith is meaningful, not despite insufficient evidence, but because of it. Humans have a fundamental need for mystery. If everything were explained and predictable, life would become mechanical and dull. Rudolf Otto expressed the core of religious experience as mysterium tremendum in the idea of the holy. This is a unique experience where fear and fascination occur simultaneously, which cannot be replaced by scientific explanation. Even Einstein said, "The most beautiful emotion is the mysterious. This is the source of all true art and science." G.K. Chesterton wrote in Orthodoxy, "Mystery is not despair, but hope. Mystery is not what we don't know, but that we can never know everything. A world without mystery is like a world without poetry. If everything were explained, measured, and predictable, wonder and gratitude, humility and awe would also disappear." In Christian tradition, human cognitive ability itself is seen as distorted by sin. Calvin expressed in Institutes of the Christian Religion that the human mind is an idol factory. Romans 1:21-22 describes, "For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God, nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools." This suggests that the problem lies not in lack of evidence, but in the bias of human cognitive ability itself. No matter how clear evidence is presented, a biased mind will distort or reject it. Chapter 3. The fundamental difference between proof and revelation. Proof is a process where humans set conditions and judge objects according to those conditions. Here, humans are judges, and the judged object is the defendant. Consider mathematical proof. When proving the Pythagorean theorem, we set logical rules and judge the theorem's truth or falsity according to those rules. Here, human reason is the final judge. Scientific proof is the same. We set experimental conditions and judge the validity of hypotheses based on observable and repeatable phenomena. Here too, human reason and experience serve as final arbiters. In legal proof, we see the same structure. Judges or juries examine evidence and render verdicts of guilty or innocent according to legal standards. The common point in all these cases is that humans are the subject and set the standards of judgment. But in relationship with God, who is the judge and who is the defendant? Between creator and creature, who has the qualification to judge whom? There are several philosophical problems with demanding proof from God. First, the problem of circular logic. The standards of proof themselves are unverified. Can the proposition, "only what can be scientifically proven is true," be scientifically proven? Impossible. Second, category error. the attempt to measure spiritual reality with material methods. This is like measuring temperature with a ruler or weighing sound with scales. Third, reductionism, the attempt to reduce complex reality to simple elements, but the whole is not a simple sum of parts. Fourth, the myth of objectivism. Completely objective observers don't exist. All observation includes the observer's perspective and premises. Fifth, the limits of language. All proof is conducted through language, but language itself is imperfect and context dependent. However, revelation is a completely different method. Here, God is sovereign, and humans are receivers. God decides when, how, and to whom to reveal himself. When Jesus said to Peter in Matthew 16:17, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven," this is exactly what it means. Looking at the characteristics of revelation first, it flows only from God to humans. It's not something humans can obtain by demanding, and it's God's pure gift. It doesn't depend on human qualifications or conditions, and it's not information transmission, but personal encounter. Therefore, it includes a transcendent dimension that cannot be completely understood and fundamentally transforms the receiver. And one thing that must be clearly established is that revelation doesn't oppose reason. Rather, it completes and transcends reason. Augustine said, "I believe in order to understand." This doesn't mean blind faith, but that deep understanding is impossible without faith. Anselm expressed it as faith seeking understanding. Faith doesn't reject understanding, but rather seeks deeper understanding. Thomas Aquinas pursued harmony between reason and revelation. He saw that natural reason could know God's existence to some extent, but complete knowledge requires revelation. Then, is revelation completely unverifiable? Not so. Revelation has its own methods of confirmation. 1. Internal confirmation. According to Romans 8:16, there's the Spirit's witness. 2. Consistency. It conforms to the consistent message of the entire Bible and never contradicts Scripture. 3. Transformative power. It brings about actual life changes. 4th, community confirmation. It's strengthened by the testimony of the faith community. 5. Historical continuity. It has been the vitality of Christianity for 2,000 years. And 6. Moral fruits. Love, joy, peace, etc. The fruits of the Spirit described in Galatians 5:22-23 appear. These confirmations, while different from scientific proof, have their own reliability. Proof and revelation are fundamentally different methods of knowledge. Proof is a top-down approach led by humans, while revelation is a bottom-up approach led by God. Proof pursues objective information, but revelation aims for personal encounter. Proof provides certainty, but revelation requires trust. God chose the method of revelation rather than proof because he wants a personal relationship, not an informational relationship with us. Chapter 4. The harmony of faith and reason. Many people see faith and reason as opposing. They think faith is irrational and reason is anti-religious. But this is a false dichotomy. This dichotomy is a product of the Enlightenment era. Enlightenment thinkers classified religion as superstition or ignorance and saw reason as a tool to overcome it. Voltaire's slogan, "Crush the infamous thing, superstition," symbolizes this spirit. Modern people's misunderstandings about faith can be summarized as 1. Faith is blind belief without evidence. But actually, faith is rational trust based on incomplete evidence. 2. Faith doesn't allow doubt. But actually, Healthy faith becomes more mature through doubt and questions. 3. Faith doesn't change, but actually, faith continues to develop through experience and reflection. 4. Faith is personal and subjective, but actually, faith has objective foundations and community confirmation. And 5. Faith is unrelated to action, but actually, genuine faith brings about life changes. It manifests in actions. Many scientists have deepened their faith through scientific research. Nobel Prize winner Charles Townes. Science and religion are essentially similar in that both pursue truth. Science is discovering God's work in nature. Francis Collins, who led the Human Genome Project. In his book, The Language of God, he expressed that DNA is God's language. He sees the designer's touch in life's complexity and precision. Theoretical physicist John Polkinghorne, a Cambridge University mathematical physics professor who became an Anglican priest. He says, science and religion deal with truths of different dimensions. Nobel Prize winner William Phillips. God gave me 2 books, the Book of Nature and the Book of Scripture. Both were written by the same author, so they cannot contradict each other. Astrophysicist Hugh Ross. He argues that the fine-tuning of the universe strongly suggests the existence of a designer. These scholars don't see science and faith as opposing, but as mutually complementary. Science tells us how God made the universe, and faith tells us why he made it. Chapter 5. Practical application. How shall we live? Why do we demand proof from God? Looking at the roots, we can discover several things. First, desire for control. We want to confine God within the range we can understand. Freud called religion the universal form of obsessional neurosis, but rather, religious rejection might be an expression of the desire for control. Acknowledging God's existence means acknowledging that we are not the supreme authority. Modern people especially value autonomy. Kant's "dare to know" became the Enlightenment motto, and individual autonomous reason came to be regarded as the supreme authority. But God's existence challenges such autonomy. Suddenly we become creatures, beings who must be held accountable. Second, pride. We want to be the subject of judgment. The Tower of Babel story shows humanity's fundamental pride. What Genesis 11:4 describes as wanting to reach to the heavens so that we may make a name for ourselves reveals human desire. Modern technological civilization is, in some sense, a new Tower of Babel. The desire for humans to become gods, the desire to control and explain everything. Francis Bacon's "knowledge is power" shows a perspective that views knowledge as a means of power. Third, fear. We find it difficult to endure uncertainty. Modern times are called risk society. According to Ulrich Beck, modern people live suffering from various risks and uncertainties. In such situations, people develop strong desires for certainty. Religion is sometimes regarded as a means to provide such certainty. But genuine faith is not eliminating uncertainty, but trusting even in uncertainty. Fourth, wounds and disappointment. Past religious experiences or disappointments with religious people can lead to defensive skepticism. Many people develop negative images of God due to authoritarian and oppressive religious experiences in childhood. Also, seeing the hypocrisy of religious people or corruption of religious institutions can lead to disappointment with religion as a whole. Acknowledging and letting go of such hearts is the beginning of faith. Socrates said, "I know that I know nothing." This is the beginning of true wisdom. the same is true before God. We must acknowledge the limits of our knowledge. A humble epistemological attitude includes 1. Acknowledging ignorance, acknowledging that there's much more we don't know. The humility that we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg. 2. Accepting limitations, accepting the limits of human reason. Not being able to understand everything doesn't mean it's false. 3. Open mind, having an open attitude toward new truth, not being bound by existing prejudices or biases. 4. Patient attitude, knowing how to wait without demanding immediate answers. Truth sometimes reveals itself gradually over time. And 5. Awe, not losing awe for mystery and transcendence, not trying to reduce everything to one's range of understanding. Chapter 6. Message to modern society. Modern society is dominated by scientism. Scientism is an ideology claiming that science is the only pathway to all truth. But such an attitude reduces humans to mere matter, deprives meaning and purpose, and ignores spiritual thirst. On the other hand, postmodern skepticism that denies absolute truth is also problematic. The claim that everything is relative ultimately leads to nihilism that nothing is certain. What we need is to recognize science's usefulness, while also recognizing its limitations and having an open mind toward reality beyond science. C.S. Lewis pointed out in Miracles the logical contradiction that naturalism believes in reason while assuming a universe from which reason cannot emerge. Indeed, if our brains are simply products of material evolution, how can our trust in logic and truth be justified? Interestingly, modern society is experiencing growing thirst for spirituality alongside material civilization's development. The popularity of meditation, yoga, New Age, etc. shows that humans are not simply material beings. Modern society also faces serious problems of inequality and injustice. Economic inequality with wealth concentration and deepening polarization. Educational inequality with educational opportunity gaps leading to class solidification. Medical inequality with notable disparities in healthcare access. Digital divide suggesting differences in information access capabilities. And gender inequality implying discrimination and opportunity imbalances based on gender. What message can Christianity give about such problems? The Bible consistently emphasizes justice and righteousness. Micah 6:8. He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. And Isaiah 1:17. Learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow. Believing in God should lead to concern for such justice. We shouldn't be interested only in personal salvation, but also in society's transformation. Modern education systems also face fundamental problems. True education is not information transmission, but bringing about life transformation. The various crises of modern society, limitations of scientism, postmodern nihilism, materialism's emptiness, technological civilization's dilemmas, environmental crisis, social injustice, loss of death's meaning, education's crisis, all these are fundamentally worldview problems. The reason God chose revelation rather than scientific proof is precisely because he wants such holistic and comprehensive transformation. Scientific proof can only elicit intellectual agreement, but revelation brings about transformation of entire life. The true answer to modern society's crises lies not in more technology or more sophisticated institutions, but in recovering correct worldview and values. And that begins with correct relationship with God. Epilogue. Before the cross. Starting with the question of why God doesn't prove himself scientifically, we have deeply explored the mystery of revelation and faith. And now at the end of all paths, we face one cross. The cross is central to Christian faith, and the cross most clearly shows why God chose a different method rather than scientific proof. The cross is God's final and decisive revelation. Here, God most clearly revealed his love, but the cross wasn't scientific proof either. Rather, according to 1 Corinthians 1:23, to most people it was a stumbling block and foolishness. Jews expected the Messiah to be a political liberator. They wanted a powerful king who would liberate them from Roman oppression and restore David's kingdom. But Jesus dying on the cross was the opposite of their expectations. Greeks pursued philosophical wisdom and logical explanation. They wanted systematic and rational truth, like Plato's theory of forms or Aristotle's logic. But the cross's message didn't fit their intellectual system. Romans worshipped power and strength. They boasted of powerful military force and efficient governance systems. But the cross was a symbol of weakness and defeat. Yet through this foolish cross, countless people met God. They came to know God not through scientific evidence, but through love's revelation. The cross is a paradoxical event that overturns all human expectations and common sense. First, the cross shows extreme weakness, but simultaneously displays the most powerful ability. It gives life through death, achieves victory through defeat. Therefore, it appears foolish from human perspective, but is the wisest method from God's perspective. It doesn't try to overcome violence with violence, but overcomes hatred with love. Moreover, it achieves the highest salvation from the lowest place. God, who came in servant's form, the righteous one treated as a sinner, saves all humanity from the cross. However, it shows that death is not the end, but a new beginning. Through resurrection, death's power was broken. Consequently, an individual event that occurred at a specific time and place brings salvation to all ages and all peoples. Such paradoxes are difficult to explain with human logic. But in precisely these paradoxes, God's love is most powerfully revealed. Now the choice is yours. Will you continue demanding scientific proof and maintain distance from God? Or will you open your heart to the cross's revelation with a humble heart? Will you spend your lifetime waiting for perfect evidence? Or will you take steps of trust, even in imperfect understanding? Before the cross, we all face the same choice. Regardless of intelligence or education, social status or economic ability, we are all equally loved and must equally choose. Kierkegaard said, "Faith is a leap." But this is not a blind leap. It's a leap with sufficient reason and foundation. We see the designer's touch in nature. We discover moral law in conscience. We witness God's intervention in history. We encounter God's love through Jesus Christ. All these things are not scientific proof, but they provide sufficient foundation. And the cross is the climax and completion of all these evidences. Perhaps some reading this still don't have confidence. That's okay too. God understands your honest concerns. He is not an object to be proven, but a person to meet. He is not an object to research, but a subject to love. He is not a problem to understand, but a person to trust. This is the most precious truth we've discovered through our long journey. Before the cross, we realize God is not waiting for us to prove him, but waiting for us to accept his love. Science gives answers to how, but the cross gives answers to why. Answers to why God created us, why he saves us, why he loves us. And that answer is simple. Because of love. God's love for you is surrounding you even at this moment as you read this. You don't need to wait for scientific proof. Accept that love right now. That's exactly what God wants. For God so loved the world, that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. John 3:16. This is God's heart that transcends all proof. What we've discovered is not that God rejects scientific proof, but that he wants to meet us in a deeper and more meaningful way. Scientific proof provides knowledge, but revelation provides relationship. Scientific proof convinces the head, but revelation transforms the heart. Scientific proof gives temporary certainty, but revelation gives eternal hope. God wants us not simply to know about him, but to know him. He wants relationship, not information. Love, not knowledge. Trust, not proof. And the cross is the perfect expression of all this. Proof of love more powerful than logical proof. Spiritual certainty deeper than scientific certainty. Invitation to complete personal dedication rather than rational agreement. I earnestly hope such an encounter will happen in your life. I pray you will experience love that transcends proof, relationship that surpasses logic, faith more certain than science. May God's love be with you. Thank you